In this quick conversation, we're going to answer some of the most important questions about how do you pay for care. If you find yourself in midlife or beyond, you find that there are a lot of things that you never expected. And one of the biggest things those of us in the sandwich generation find is that we never expected to care for an older parent or loved one. And yet here we are. There's so many things to consider and to take care of. One of the biggest things is how are we going to pay for this? Whether it's someone choosing to age at home or in a community or just the day to day care of that person. How to pay for it weighs on most people's minds. And the thing is, there are more options available to you than you ever expected. We're going to be talking with Richard Wexler, the founder of the Plan to Age, and Steph Byral. They're a nonprofit that provides free tips, tools, resources, and education to help people and their families as they go through the aging process together. In this quick video, we're going to have a conversation that answers some of the biggest questions about how do you pay for care and give you an opportunity to download a free guide that a Plan to Age has put together to show you 10 ways to pay for care. Now, let's get to the conversation. So, why is it that so many families wait until there's a crisis or something goes wrong before they figure out how to pay for care?
That's interesting, Bradley. I think, my wife and I went through this. We got four parents. Most people aren't going to wind up taking care of four parents. But I think using my own situation, you have a life. You have maybe a wife, a husband, a partner. You may have kids. You have a job. You have a rent to pay. You have a mortgage. And you're just conducting your own life somewhere in the back of your mind. Mom and dad are fine. And we don't need to be talking about this or plan for this. And then unfortunately, for most of us, when that phone call comes, today it can be a text as well. And all of a sudden, mom's in the ER, something bad has happened to dad. And now you're in this situation with no planning.
I would say my situation is similar, a little different in the sense that I'm in my early 30s and my dad was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's a few years ago now. So that was nothing I expected to hear, for probably another 10, 15, 20 years. So it did not even cross my mind to plan ahead for my aging journey, my parents' aging journey. My grandparents are still around. So once I started talking with Richard and seeing that this is kind of unfortunately, a normal thing that people are not planning for. We plan for celebrations like weddings, birthday parties, vacations, down to every detail. But we don't plan for anything past, and I don't want to say past retirement, but I feel like that's kind of where it stops in a sense. Like financially, you're going to plan for retirement, but there's other pieces after that might not be covered. And that's a piece that we need to start looking at more.
It becomes a case of it's coming, but you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what all this encompasses. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions that families have about paying for care?
One of the biggest misconceptions, it's probably not going to be that difficult. I have literally stood in front of thousands of people, and I don't know how many people have told me when it eventually happens, it won't be that difficult. Maybe a wife to a husband to a wife, maybe talking about their parents. We'll just deal with it. And then not even thinking, well, where do you live as adult children? Where do mom and dad live? Are they still in the same house you grew up in? And you're 2 states away, half a country away. I've dealt with people that are in Europe and their parents are still in the US. But most people just don't think it's going to be that big of a deal.
I would say that one of the things that is a little unique in our family's dynamic is my parents are planners, so they have kind of planned for the future and the what ifs and what might happen. But care is a piece of it that some of the funding sources that they plan for it doesn't necessarily touch that. And with my mom, not even at retirement age, we still have to keep that in mind that my great grandma just died recently at 105. So my mom might have 40 years left on her after my dad passes. So that's something that the ways to pay for the care can be so unique. There's even some local opportunities that we found that are a few like hundred or a few $1,000s a year to help, but there's so many different ways and not everything pays for everything either. So getting into those nuances is going to be important on this journey.
Other than failing to plan and not thinking about it, what are probably the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to paying?
So planning, paying, pretty much the same thing. I've gotten so many calls over the years. It's usually the female because latest report from the AARP, most caregivers are females, the daughter, the wife, daughter-in-law, etc. And they'll comment to me, Mom's been on, she's 85, she's been on Medicare for 20 years. So if something eventually happens to her, she's fine. Medicare will pay for it. And unfortunately, folks, it doesn't. It'll pay for your oxygen and your walker and your wheelchair and a certain amount of time in a skilled nursing facility in the hospital, but it's not going to pay for long-term care. And a lot of people have that misconception.
We talk about misconceptions about Medicare or insurance, and we think, well, it's just going to cover it all, and it's not. There are many different ways to pay for this, but it seems that we tend to default to thinking those are pretty much the basic.
Yeah, we do a national conversation on aging and care, and that event talking about over 10 different ways to pay for care. And there's actually a few ways out there that people in the industry probably don't even realize are real ways. These are ways sometimes that I found at 3 o'clock in the morning when I should be sleeping and I'm surfing the web. But there's numerous ways out there to pay for care because unfortunately for a lot of us, this is going to wind up on the family. They're going to find out exactly what care costs. They're not going to be able to afford a professional coming in the home for mom. They're not going to be able to move mom to an assisted living, or maybe mom just doesn't want to move. Then the question is, who's going to take care of her? And for a lot of families, this is going to wind up with the adult children.
So without giving away all the 10 different ways to pay, which you have a guide for, and people can get that for free here. We're putting information about that below. But what are a couple of the more unique or overlooked ways that people can pay beyond the obvious of insurance?
There's a couple out there, again, that most people aren't aware of. There's a fund that one talks about it in the guide from the German government. And this is a fund that's actually worldwide. We'll talk about that and explain how that works and how you might be eligible. And that fund will pay for care irrespective of where someone lives.
Specific to my caregiving journey with my dad that we found is through our local area aging or commission on aging, it might be called in some places. They have reimbursement tools for caregivers. So my dad, for example, he goes to day programming since my mom still works full time. So they have programs set up that can help offset some of those costs. So just looking into even local resources that might not help necessarily with long-term care or assisted living, but other things on the caregiving journey before you even get to that point.
I think that's important too, because when we think of caregiving, oftentimes, or at least my experience is oftentimes we think of the day-to-day care for that particular individual or loved one, but it trickles down all the way to the family, to the caregiver themselves, who oftentimes, as you said, is an oldest daughter in many cases, or a spouse or a child or someone like that. And you're saying there are resources out there that can help the actual caregiver themselves,
yes, there's
right?
quite a few. When we talk about this four-letter word called plan, that people will plan so much, but we just don't want to plan because it's a really difficult conversation talking to mom, dad, grandparents when something happens. But with that plan and understanding all these different ways you can pay for care, and then looking at your given family situation. Do you live down the street from mom and dad? Are you 100 miles away? Are you 5 states away? What's going to happen? The tough part is something eventually happens. I tell people 95% of this will need care. Could be a few hours. It could be many years. For most, it'll be something in between.
You talk about this conversation, and it involves planning. It involves, some tough conversations, some tough love, and some looking in the mirror. What have you found be one of the best ways to initiate a conversation
Sure.
like this with with a
I've been
family member?
asked that question so many times, Bradley. I'll be standing in front of an audience and I'd love to talk to my mom, but I don't know how to do it. And the first thing I say is, don't pick up the phone, don't call mom and say, Mom, we got to talk. Mom's going to get defensive, is not going to want to talk. What I've
Right.
found over the years is if you first of all, we go into this on our site, you got to figure out who's going to make that call, which sibling, so on and so forth. The one that's making the call, when you eventually get mom on the phone, you get dad on the phone. When you ask for help or you ask for advice from a mother or father, irrespective of how old you are, you're in your sick and you're just starting to plan with parents that are late, 90. If you ask for advice, they normally will perk up and start listening, and that will start the conversation.
Right. Everybody wants to
Yeah.
be needed still. And as a parent, I can say, even though they're grown, doesn't matter if you're close to
Yeah.
60 or 80, they're still your baby. So it's good. That's great advice. So we talked about the upcoming event, about 10 ways to pay. We're going to share a lot of these things more in depth, and we're going to put information on how you can get that and access that free event below. Also, there's a guide that A Plan to Age has put together called 10 Ways to Pay for Care. Well, and that's an important resource that is available for free, and they can access that here. Tell me a little bit about what you all do at Plan to Age.
So it's interesting, and I could talk for a long time. We'll try to keep this really short. This was built in partnership with Peter Ross, who's the co-founder and CEO of Senior Helpers. When he and I started talking almost 2 years ago, we both wanted to do more and realized that 95% of people out there have never had this conversation, aren't prepared when something happens to mom, something happens to dad. And we wanted to provide a lot of education like this conversation we're going to have. We wanted to teach this family conversation we're talking about. We wanted to actually give them, once they've had that conversation, a plan online they can download, answer a bunch of pertinent questions, and then, like an estate plan, update. And then we as an organization are also looking at some of the largest issues affecting an aging nation and trying to determine, for instance, we have over 100 million people in this country over 50. How are we going to house all those people? And how are we going to care for all those people? So at A Plan to Age, there is a lot on our plate.
I think it's important to note too that you all are a nonprofit. You're not selling anything. But what you all do, in addition to being an advocate for these things, is you provide education, you provide resources, tools, events. And I can tell you, it's just a great place for people to jump off, to start. And whether you're planning, which everybody should, but they don't, or if you are knee deep in a crisis, which is probably more common. It's that 911, oh my God, mom fell. What do we do? Or how do we find a caregiver? How do we pay for this? Or how do we retrofit her home or anything like that? It's pretty all encompassing. And I suggest to anyone watching this to check them out. I hope you got something out of this quick video, but that just scratches the surface. There's so much more to cover and to learn. And if you're interested in going deeper, make sure you check out the comments below and click the link to download your free guide, 10 Ways to Pay for Care, brought to you by the folks at A Plan to Age. And while you're there, you're going to have an opportunity to register for a free online event where they answer more questions that you have about how to pay for care.